Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Gunn, Coordinator of Digital Scholarship at Catholic University of America. Welcome. Today's workshop will be recorded and we will make it available to all of you afterward. Today we're going to be looking at organizing and documenting your data. We will talk about some of the issues that affect research data management and some best practices and tips. So let's get started. So here is a wonderful cartoon. It's been around for a few years, and I think it really demonstrates, I think, what most of us do in our lives with regards to how we handle our files. You'll notice all the different variations of Untitled that are listed there. You can see the different document types. There's a doc, there's docx, there's JPEG, that sort of thing. So it is kind of funny. So pro tip, never look in someone else's documents folder, right? But the funny thing is we're very much like the person at the computer. However, that's on a personal scale. On a professional scale, there's much more serious ramifications with dealing with research data. So in the case, there's one particular case where in 2013, a psychology article examined the correlation between shame and the desire for money was retracted for reproducibility issues. And the corresponding author gave a summation of the problem. He said, my research assistant who had left my lab last year did not keep the original questionnaires. So hence we cannot have correct data to rerun the data. So basically without the original questionnaire, the authors do not have the proper documentation to verify their results. Sadly, this is just one of the many instances where significant research problems arose due to lack of documentation. Another problem that's been documented was actually in 2014. There was a neurology article. Swiss neurologists did a paper. I won't give you the title, but they had to retract their paper. And the reason why they had to do so was that while they're applying this, quote, while applying the same analyses to another data set, the authors discovered that a systematic human error in coding the name of the files affected the article's conclusions. So basically, through poor organization and file naming, the authors accidentally analyzed the wrong files and came to the wrong scientific conclusions. So this is an example of mistaken analysis, and just one of the ways that poor data organization can impact your research. And there are other horror stories from the literature here, but I just wanted to point out a couple of them to you right now, just to give you a sense of what we're talking about here. So what I'd like to do today, basically, have a little brief discussion on what data is, why you want to document and manage your data. We want to talk about the research data lifecycle. It's important to understand the big picture when you're working with your data. And then we're going to take a look at, how can I get organized with this? And one great ways is using data management plans. And then last, so I'm going to be talking very much, I want to say theoretically, but just looking at the big picture type thing. And then what we'll do is we'll get into data organization and documenting tips. So you'll leave with some ideas of how to think about how you manage your own data moving forward. All right. So I always have a fun discussion with folks. Oxford English Dictionary, is it data or is it data? The big issue of our time. Well, actually, the Oxford English Dictionary says it can be both, and they give pronunciations for both. So just to give you an idea, that it used to be data all the time for most of the time, and then data sort of entered it, perhaps, commander data from Star Trek, who knows. But I just thought I'd point that out. It's kind of interesting. What is it? What is exactly research data? So you're looking at very different kinds of data that you can be working with. So everything from observational data, captured in real time, usually irreplaceable. Um, so for example, sensor readings or images of the physical world, survey data, that sort of thing. It can be also experimental data. So from lab equipment, reproducible, but it's expensive. So biology, you have no gene sequences. There's images of water flowing through a flume or chromatograms as well as others. Another type of data you can have is simulation, test models, models and metadata more important than the actual raw data that's being generated. You have climate models and economic models are examples of that. You can also have derived or compiled data. It's reproducible, but it's expensive. So you have text and data mining. It's a common thing in the humanities, and compiled databases, and as well as 3D models. So how do you work with all of that? And then you also have reference or canonical data. So collections of smaller data sets, gene sequencing data banks, chemical structure, spatial data portals, all these different types of data that you could be working with if you're in the sciences, social sciences, lesser degree the humanities. So it's very important to understand what is the data that you are working with. So what is the form of the data? So can it come in many? It can come in many forms, including text, right? You have field or laboratory notes, no survey responses, just pen and paper type thing. You can have numeric, tables, counts, measurements, um, can be that. You also have audio visual. So you have images, sound recordings, and videos. You can have models. You can have computer code. How do you manage all that? You can also have a discipline specific data management concerns. So for example, you have what's called FITS in astronomy. That's the flexible image transport system. So it's an open standard defining a digital file format useful for storage, transmission, and processing of data. So it's very interesting how it's formatted as n-dimensional arrays or tables. So you can have that type of thing. So it's very commonly used digital file format in astronomy. But I suspect most of us who don't work in astronomy aren't even aware of its existence. You also have CIF in chemistry. So that it stands for crystallographic information file. So again, it's a standard text file format for representing crystallographic information. And it's actually promulgated by the International Union of Crystallography. So that's another thing, another type of scholarship that's generated from associations and professional associations and unions and that sort of thing. And then last, you have instrument-specific data forms. So equipment outputs, equipment's especially designed to do one particular job at one particular job. And unless you're an expert on using that particular hardware, then it's going to be incomprehensible to those outside that particular discipline. All right, so why do you want to document and manage your data? Well, there are a number of benefits. So you want to establish how you will collect, document, organize, manage, and preserve your data at the beginning of your research project. And that has many benefits. So, the time investment that you do, writing down all your stuff, documenting what you have, and managing your data, it actually pays off more in the long run. That way you don't have to go back and do it over and over again. So a good sound time investment at the beginning will help you moving forward. Your data also will be easier for you and your collaborators to find, use, and analyze your data. So it's very much working with your own data, being consistent with it. It's very much something that is going to be useful for the people working around you. And again, it can be quite a bit of a time saver. Another benefit is following good data management practices means that other researchers can find, understand, and use the data in the future. You really want to have great metadata, for example, so that other people, other researchers who come along later, once you've left the project far behind while you're working on new things, people will be able to come back to it and look at it and say, oh yeah, I see what those researchers were doing. So that's always an important thing. Then by documenting your data and recommending appropriate ways to cite your data, you can be sure to get credit for your data products. So you definitely want to get credit for the data you create, the data sets that you curate moving forward and all that, so that your data's, not only your papers that you write, but also the data sets that you create can be cited by future researchers. So you got to ask some questions, right? So, what types of data do I have? How much do I have is also a very important question. Do I use any third-party data? There's a whole universe of using third-party data. What are the legal restrictions, ethical restrictions that come with that particular third-party data? So what data tools and technologies are readily available to me in working on my particular project? How much do I need to collaborate? Is this internal or external to my institution? Good questions to ask. How long must I keep the data when you generate it? Again, there can be institutional requirements, legal requirements, things you have to consider. So will I share my data? It's great that you are willing to share your data, but can you? Perhaps some of your data is highly confidential and therefore is not allowed by you for sharing your data. So you got to ask questions like that. So does my data have security concerns such as personally identifiable information, right? So one of the big things is de-anonymizing your data, but you have to make sure that's done well and correctly. Otherwise, there are ways to de-anonymize it rather, and to reverse engineer, if you will, the data. So you have to be very careful about that. What does my funder, institution, and employer require? So if you're working within an institution, you need to talk to your department of sponsored research or whatever is similar at your institution about what sort of requirements are you required, requirements that you need to follow in order to make sure that you're compliant with university policy. Is there anything particular in my research workflow that might affect my data management? So that's kind of an interesting question. You have to look at how your information, your data is being collected, and we'll talk about a little bit of the process of all that, because what it is that you're collecting and how you're collecting all that will definitely affect your data management plan. And then last, what problems with my data do I often encounter? You're working with particular, gathering the data. Is it consistent? Do you have a lot of non-available or blank responses, that sort of thing? So you have to make sure that you're cognizant of your problems with your data, because later you are going to document it in your plan and in your final products, the limitations of your data collection, for example. So a whole bunch of questions you can ask. All right, so we'll take a look at the research data lifecycle here, just a big quick picture here. So when you're looking at the research data management lifecycle, what is it that you're looking at, right? You're looking at a research question starting off the left-hand side here. Then you're doing your data search and your reuse and that sort of thing. Then you formulate your data management plan. And then at this point, you're going to start describing your data and what you're doing. You're going to be collecting it. You're going to be analyzing it. Perhaps you're going to recollecting it. And of course, you're going to be storing it as you move forward through the process. So once you come out of that, you'll archive your data, and then last, you'll probably have publications that'll come from it. And from the publications, new research questions will come about. So if you're looking at the data lifecycle, you have a similar process here that is kind of parallels the research data management's life cycle. So if you look at the proposal, planning, the writing at the beginning of the process, the project startup, then you get into the whole data collection, data analysis, repurposing. Then once you've got something, you've got the data sharing that comes out of it, and then the end of the project. And along the way, you've got the data discovery that's happening, the reuse, the data archive, wherever that is, and moving forward. So you can see depositing, data archive, the reuse, and then data discovery, and then moving into the whole idea of, again, planning a new research question from there. Slightly more detailed look of the data lifecycle here. So you're looking at the proposal, planning, and writing, and then this project startup and the data management. So you really do have to put a lot of planning effort up front, how you're going to go and how the project is going to end. You need to have some time working, making sure you plan as much as you can, so that you keep the surprises down the road at a minimum. So you have data collection and file creation, right? So before you even start doing your data collection, you want to make sure you have a file management system that's in place, and what it is that you're going to be keeping and what you're not going to be keeping, and how that's going to be organized. So you get into file creation. Data analysis is your next step. You want to prepare data for sharing with others, and then depositing that data. Where are you going to put your data once you're done with it? You're not going to throw it away, are you? I hope not. There are definitely data repositories out there, but it's important to ask yourself, where am I going to put my data? That's where you think about in the proposal, planning, and writing stage, and not so late in the game. And then after deposit, the archival activities, is it shareable? How is it preserved? That sort of thing. All right. So research data management plan. It's very important here. So why have a data management plan? Well, it does save time in the long run. You'll know what the plan is from the start, and you'll be able to keep everything organized. It increases your efficiency. So it's much easier for you and others to understand and reuse your data in the future. It prevents the duplication of effort. It'll be more obvious what has been done in your lab in the past and how it turned out. So that's always a good reason. And it makes it easier to keep your data organized for later preservation. And last, it may be required by your funding agency. And funding agencies do require a lot of the data. And sometimes the data plans listed, I think most of them do now these days. And a lot of them will say, okay, what are you going to do with the data once you're finished with it? So writing a data management plan. So writing a data management plan, you gotta ask yourself 5 questions right up front. So what data will you create? What is it that you expect to collect that's going to be important to you? How will you document and organize your data? How will you store your data, and if necessary, keep it secure? How will you manage your data after the completion of the project? Then how will you make your data available for reuse as necessary? So these are the questions you need to ask up front right away. Get a broader picture of what you're going to be doing. So this particular data lifecycle here breaks it down for you. It is from the Data One website. If you're not familiar with this website, absolutely get familiar with it. They just did a major revamp in the past year or so, so they've got a lot of excellent stuff here. I point out a best practices primer here, which is a great PDF file, and it talks you through the whole process here from planning to analyzing. So the data lifecycle has 8 components. So the first step is the plan, and the plan is basically everything that's listed on the page here. So you have to have what is you can do at every stage of the process here. So excuse me, the plan is a description of the data that will be compiled, and then how the data will be managed and made accessible throughout its lifetime. So what data will be generated, where's your repository going to be, how the data will be organized, who will manage the data, the creation of metadata records, sharing your data, preserving your data, your budget, what are your institutional resources that you can bring. All that sort of stuff is going to be part of that data management plan. Basically, once you've got a plan there, your first step then at that point is to look at collecting. So you want to look at, the observations that are made either by hand or with sensors or other instruments, and the data is placed into digital form. So you have to keep track of that. You can create a template for your data. You can describe the contents of your data files, use consistent data organization, use plain ASCII characters for file names. Kind of simple, but is very much necessary. You can assign descriptive file names, keep raw data raw, if you will. If you clean the data, sometimes, in most cases, you do have to do that. Then you have to document the process so other people, other researchers further down the line can understand what it is that you're doing. Assurance is another next step, is the quality of the data are assured through checks and inspections. So your basic quality assurance and quality control on the data collection, the entry and analysis is absolutely necessary. I mean, if you're very much inconsistent, then your results are going to be just wrong. So, keep track of outliers, look in your data set, communicate data quality, identify missing values, that sort of thing moving forward. And that next step is that you're going to have to describe a lot of what you're working with. So data are accurately and thoroughly described using the appropriate metadata standards, So a good record will have the name of the data set, the date last modified, example data file records, personnel and stakeholders will be part of that. You can describe the scientific context, the 5 W's, that sort of thing, and the parameters of the study. So, what was measured, what's the unit of measure, the format, the precision, accuracy, uncertainty, what's the taxonomy of the data? What are the definitions of codes? Do you have a data dictionary so people can understand particular concepts that are being used in a particular way, and known problems that limit data use? That's another issue that comes up quite a bit. And then last, how do you cite the data set so it can be discoverable by other people? Your next level is going to be, next step is going to be to preserve. So your data is submitted to an appropriately long-term archives on, for example, a data center. You want to identify data with long-term value, store data. You want to use standard terminology so that others can find your work. You want to look at the legal and other policies that affect sharing your work. And data can even be licensed as well. The next step is discoverability. So potentially useful data are located and obtained along with the relevant information about the data, in this case, metadata. So, looking for open data sets, you can go to data.gov is a big one. Data.world is another one. definitely they can you can find a lot more material out there at various data repositories as well. Your next step is to integrate. So data from disparate sources are combined to form one homogeneous set of data that can be readily analyzed. Well, that's great, but you'll need to document the derived data set, which means tracing the use of data sets and data elements. So you're looking at data provenance. You know, you're attributing the creators of the original data set. You know, you want to document that. And you also want to point out any errors that were in the original data sets and how you overcame them. So you have a lot of different questions that you need to ask. And of course, analyze is the last bit where you have data's analyzed and visualized and put out there for others to comment on. Now you do need a data management plan. And thankfully, there's a data management plan tool out there. It's the dmptool.org. You can check that out. Benefits of using the DMP tool is that it helps you to create and maintain different versions of data management plans, especially as your project evolves. So it also provides useful guidance on data management issues and how to meet research funders' requirements. So you can also think of it as benefits to export attractive and useful plans in a variety of formats. And it does allow collaborative work when creating data management plans. So just to give you a quick example from the website. So you can create your own plan, or you can use someone else's template. So they have a lot of interesting documentation up there. Many organizations will have links to their own guidelines, and some even provide sample plans. So you'll notice here, just some of the titles listed here, some of the foundations that are given. You know, here, Department of Energy, Sloan, Alfred P. Sloan. You know, how recent is it? Who are the funders? They even give you a proposal guidelines, and they give you the opportunity to create a new plan if you want. Some of them, there's none listed here, but some actually do show sample plans so you can see what other people have done to have a successful grant or whatever, and you can sort of model your work on that if that's the way you want to go. All right. So that was sort of like the big overview. Many questions, by no means exhaustive, questions that you should be asking yourself as you're working on your project. Now we're going to shift to some basic tips on organizing and documenting your data right here. So we're going to look at how to do some file naming, how to do file structure for your plan, as well as a file format. So file naming. So yes, you remember that cartoon at the beginning, right? So it was horrible the way all those different files were named. So what you want to be looking at is a number of different issues. I pulled some of the more important points from the National Archives. And, you know, that's a government organization that has to get it right because they're gathering government documentation from all the other departments in the government. So they have to make sure that things are really consistent. So they list a number of good practices here. So taking a look at them, we see, you know, be unique and consistently structured. You know, it may be even worthwhile just to, you plan ahead. How are you going to handle different types of naming conventions? So if you look at, you can be persistent and not tied to anything that changes over time or location. So you really do have to think about that. Are you putting stuff in presidential order? Are you using the president's last name? That sort of thing that you have to look at. You also have to limit the character length to no more than 25 to 35 characters. So it should be sufficiently describable what someone's looking at if they can look at that particular file name without having to guess. So you want to use, next step process, use leading zeros to facilitate sorting in numerical order. So following a numerical scheme, so 001, 002, that sort of thing, instead of 1, 2, that sort of thing. You'll notice what we're doing in the process is making these things, these file naming conventions, more machine readable in that sense. So it's important, especially with regards to numbers. Starting with 0 is a good thing. Containing a file format extension. Yeah, so it doesn't matter if your wonderful character length is, 20 characters or whatever. People don't know what kind of document it is. Then it becomes problematic. Well, how do you go about opening it? So you also use a period followed by a file extension. So for example, you have .tiff, .jpeg, that sort of thing, .pdf. So you want people to clearly understand what it is, the particular format that's being used. So some best practices, some more here is, use lowercase letters, okay? But if you're doing a name that has more than one word, you have to start each word with an uppercase letter. For example, file underscore name underscore convention, that sort of thing. And again, be consistent with that. So you want to use numbers and or letters, but not characters such as symbols or spaces that could cause complications across operating platforms, right? So you have to be very careful what sort of symbols that you are using. If you use hyphens or underscores instead of spaces, that is a much better practice. People understand much more clearly the words that are between the underscores than with spaces. You always think maybe something's missing in that space. You also want to use international standard date notation. So here's a couple good examples here of how dates can be organized. So you want to avoid blank spaces anywhere with the character string. And last, you don't want to use an overly complex or lengthy naming scheme that is accessible to human error during manual input, such as file name convention, Joe's final version, edited final .doc. So, right, so you type that out, maybe you miss a letter or something like that, and that changes everything. I should also point out too, just as a side comment, that file naming conventions, many disciplines have file naming conventions. So it's important if you're working in, say, biology, that you may want to take a look at something called the Open Biological and Biomedical Ontology Foundry. You really don't want to reinvent the wheel. You want to see how other people are dealing with particular, biological data, and then sort of follow their best practices in that particular discipline. So file renaming software, what can you use if you wanted to do some renaming? Well, you have a number of these tools here that are available to you. So bulk rename utility, I think, is the dominant one out there. Renamer for Mac, there's PS Renamer, and then there's Zamzar and that. So bulk rename utility is probably the most popular one going forward. So that's file renaming, but what if you want to do file versioning? You want to keep track of the different file versions, which is very, very important. So you have these 4 open access, freely available ones that you can use. I think everyone here is probably familiar with Git, but are you familiar with Bazaar, Mercurial, Tortoise? Have you heard of these before? So something to keep in mind. With regards to data organization, our next step after file naming is file structure. So how is it all going to come together, these individual files? So when you're looking at best practices, you want to look at the structure of your directories or folders for organizing the files. They should have a clear documented naming convention. So the top level folder or directory should include the project title, the unique identifier, and a date or year. Next, the directories of folders within the substructure should be divided by a common theme. So for example, each folder may contain a run of an experiment or a different version of each data set. And I have an example here, a folder structure example from UCLA, the Data Management for the Humanities link. You can go in and take a look at that. They have some interesting information here. See, the great thing about a folder structure, if it's done well, then you should be able to go in and take a look at it without having seen this before, and then get a really good sense where everything is if you wanted to go take a look at it. So if you look at this particular project here, you look at the folders, the way they're broken down, you have data right near the top, and about halfway down, you have documentation. So data and documentation. Okay, so what is it that you're looking at? The next steps are, well, you got databases, okay, images, you've got models, you've got sound and the text. And then what's the documentation that's going on? Well, you have consent forms, you have information sheets, you have the methodology that's being used. So if you take, for example, what we have listed here, the focus group transcripts, right, under text, and you look right at the high side here where you see the Word documents, you can see right away, what type of transcripts that they are, what order they're in, and what date they were taken. So you get a lot of this information up front. So you have to take a step back, ask yourself such questions as, what's the best hierarchy for my files? Deciding whether a deep or shallow hierarchy is preferable. So if you're looking at this example here, there's a lot of stuff that's in the separate folders. Data files are further organized according to the data type and then according to research activity. So that's sort of the questions you need to ask. The documentation files are organized also according to type of documentation and research activity. So you have consistency across there. So, if you want to restrict the level of folders to 3 or 4 deep, that's great, but you don't want to go more than, say, 10 items in any given folder as well. All right, so data organization. Our next step is the file format. So what are you looking at? So for file format, your best practices, the file format is the principal factor in the ability for others to use your data in the future. So you need to plan for software and hardware obsolescence since technology continually changes. So how will others use your data if the software used to produce is no longer available? So migrating your files to a format with the characteristics listed on the next slide and keep a copy in the original format. So file formats, you want non-proprietary, not tied to a specific software product. You want it unencrypted, you want uncompressed, you want common used by the research community that you're in. You want to look at standard representations such as ASCII, Unicode, that sort of thing. Then you want to use an open documented standard. So for example, right, you want to put your material in PDF and not Word. Right? We all know, cutting and pasting a Word document into WordPress, for example, we get a lot of weird stuff going on, right? Because there's a lot of hidden code in there. So you want to keep it simple. ASCII is much better than Excel. MPEG 4 and not QuickTime. You want to look at TIFF or JPEG 2000, not GIF or JPEG, which can be a simpler form of image files. And then XML, RDF, and not relational database management systems, that sort of thing. So you always want to be looking at being very much agnostic when it comes to formats. Your next thing that you want to work on, and it's very, very important that you spend time with that, and that is metadata. So you want to look at, metadata helps you organize your information. It also helps you share your information as well. So structured information, it describes content, quality, format, location, and contact information. It's similar to descriptive cataloging of library resources. So that's one way to look at it. You have metadata schema are sets of metadata elements or fields for describing a particular type of information resource. You need to spend some time making sure that you're selecting the right metadata schema. Most familiar to us are those used in library catalogs and publications. So repositories like MARC, which we've used in library catalogs for years. And of course, Dublin Core has been around for a few decades now, so quite knowledgeable. But understand that there are many other different types of metadata schema out there. Some may even be applicable to your own discipline, so you need to do some homework there. So in terms of documentation, you want to provide documentation so your data will be understood. You want to interpret correctly how your data was created, and you want to look at the context for the data. So structure and any manipulations or analyses. So here's an example from Cornell University. There's many examples out there. I'm just using this particular one. So you have Research Data Management Service Group that they provide, and they have a guide to writing README style metadata, right? You know, those README files, they're actually important and you can use them to great effect. So taking a look at this particular guide here, again, offering templates. Isn't that wonderful? You can download one and it tells you all these questions that you should ask, more best practices, working with clusters of data, README files that are associated with a data file that describes all this sort of stuff. So format multiple README files identically, all this sort of thing. You'll notice that there's these scientific conventions for your discipline. Let me just scroll down here a little ways. So you have all these different things. So if you're working in art and architecture, then you want to take a look at the Getty Research Institute vocabularies. Hey, NASA has its own thing going on, know what I mean? You have the gene ontology vocabulary here. You have the geology folks with their thesauri. Just a lot of thinking that you need to put into it, and a lot of questions, sharing and accessing information like licenses and that sort of thing. So ton of information to get organized. Okay. All right, we'll just do this. All right, so how do you get started with your project? I've found this particular book to be quite useful. Came out in 2015. It's by Kristen Briney. She has a PhD in biology or chemistry, one of the two, but she also is a professionally trained librarian as well. So she's coming at it from two different points of view. Great book, highly recommend it. She also has her own blog, and she posts a lot of great material up there on how to move forward with different projects. And she'll also give you updates on information management plans data management plans that are changing and what funders now are looking at as well. If you want to take a really deep dive, I highly recommend Data One. dataone.org. They have templates and tons of tutorials to help you begin your project. So just go there, explore. It's quite amazing what they have. And last, I pointed this out and I'll do it again. The data management plan tool, definitely worth some time getting on their website and looking at what they have available there. So in conclusion, you plan your approach, spend a lot of time planning. You use the DMP tool if you can. Look at the data life cycle in order to document what you're going to do, keep, share, and archive moving forward. Your data management plan will help you with that. The sites that I've mentioned as well will definitely help you with moving forward. The more questions you can answer before you begin the project, the better off you're going to be. That's how I would put it. And there are sources. And that is my presentation for today. Excuse me. Are there any questions? Oh, hang on here. Let's see. I will go ahead. A question. Who has a question? You can shout it out or you can put it in the chat, whatever works for you.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
For those of us who work in disciplines which intentionally have both digital data and paper-driven data, what is the optimal system for harnessing it so that, we're not spending more time cataloging it than using it?
Well, I think, in my opinion, if you have paper questionnaires, for example, are you going to PDF that? I mean, where are you going to put everything when it's all finished? Have you made that decision? So that's the first question that I would ask. And again, it's going to depend on the amount of paperwork you have and your access to a decent data repository and all that.
Okay.
So
great.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can work with it.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anyone else have any questions? Well, okay. If you do have any follow, oh, wait. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, if you have any follow questions or want to have a conversation with me or whatever, my email is Gunn, Gunn @cua.edu. I'll be making the presentation and the webinar available once everything gets processed. So thank you very much, everyone. And good luck with your research in that. Oh, wait, there's one more chat. Oh, thanks so much. Yes, thank you too as well. All right. Have a great day.